Welcome to another chapter podcast with your hosts, Claire and Rebecca.
Do you love books? Well, you've come to the right place. Join us as we discuss all things books. Welcome to Chapter 8 of Another Chapter, the podcast. On today's episode, myself and Claire are going to be having a chat about non-fiction. After recent interviews and previous chapters that we have recorded, non-fiction came up as something that we felt was well worth exploring. It came up as a genre that maybe isn't read as much as it should be, and from our own discussions, it seems like it's a genre that neither of us instinctively go for either without necessarily realising it. So both myself and Claire had a quick look there at our story graph rundown before we came on to record this, and it was quite eye-opening in terms of the breakdown between fiction and non-fiction on our all-time read lists. So Claire, do you want to fill us in about what yours was like?
Yes, I have read. So if you're not familiar with Storygraph, it is an app that you can download that tracks your reading, much like Goodreads. But what I really love about the Storygraph app is that it's quite visual. So you get pie charts and graphs that show you your reading habits. You can look at the amount of pages you're reading, the different moods that you read and stuff like that. So we clicked into it and we checked out what our all-time percentage was for non-fiction, and I was at 18%, which I'm actually kind of proud of. I didn't think that I had that much non-fiction read, but that's nearly a fifth, isn't it? Yeah.
We know that maths now isn't our strong point.
Sorry, me and my maths now. Yeah.
Mine was 15%, which I don't know, like I'm surprised in a way because I don't feel like I read a lot of non-fiction, but then at the same time, because I read so much, and especially in the last couple of years, I feel like that number should be higher. Like, why am I not picking up more non-fiction, you know?
Even looking at the titles as I'm kind of scrolling through here, it's just interesting to see the variety, or sometimes the lack thereof, with regards to the type of non-fiction books. So what would you categorize as non-fiction?
Yeah,
that's an interesting one, because I would put it out there, and we discussed this before we came on, but we both would feel that an awful lot of people would look at biographies, autobiographies and memoirs as being non-fiction, but it actually includes an awful lot more than those. It's kind of an all-encompassing genre.
And it's much broader than what either of us instinctively think of. But when you think about it, then you're like, of course, because it's anything that isn't fiction is non-fiction, you know? But what would you assume non-fiction to be? You know, what jumps straight into your head?
I would always think of memoirs and biographies. Always. If someone said and kind of self-help books, I would read not a lot of them. Like, there's nothing wrong with me or anything, in the sense that, like, I'm not constantly pouring through the pages, but I do sometimes like to pick up a self-help book just to kind of, try and take care of myself a little bit more in certain areas, and I do find them quite interesting. I did psychology in college as well, and I just love delving a bit deeper into that side of things from time to time. But yeah, they would be my kind of ones that I would go to. Particularly, like, if there's been a celebrity that I'm quite fond of, or that I've enjoyed their work, and they would release a book, I'm probably going to pick it up and read it. And most of the time these books are memoirs or biographies, really, or autobiographies, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm the same. Like, when I think non-fiction, that is exactly what my mind goes to immediately. And like that, I generally am not that my list of, interest in terms of like celebrity culture is quite narrow or anything like that by any means. But it's not just anyone's memoir or autobiography that I feel like picking up, So what surprised me when I went through my Storygraph list was the titles that I just had totally forgotten are non-fiction. And of course they are. Like anything about people's lives, about, historical events, about kind of analysis of culture. There was an awful lot of titles like that I came across in my 15% of what I've read in the last number of years, because both of us have probably only been using Storygraph for maybe
recently enough,
2-3 years, probably.
So what ones kind of shocked you the most?
Not shocked in the sense that I was like, oh God, I can't believe I read that or anything, but shocked in the sense that, we'll say for example now, I had totally forgotten about books like The Kennedy Curse by James Patterson, which is actually it's a totally random book, but it's so interesting. It is about the Kennedys, the famous American kind of dynasty, and it was basically looking at the fact, as the title says, that they all just seem to be plagued by bad luck. That's, there was a lot of tragic events in that family. A lot of really negative things happened in that family. The family did quite a lot of negative things as well. But looking at the couple, the few generations of that family and all of the negative things that happened or came from them. And it was fascinating. It was an absolutely fascinating read in terms of, I suppose, just how pervasive their influence was in, culturally, at the time, and the impact that their lives had on various people. That was one that I kind of had forgotten. I read it, and then as soon as I saw it on the list, I went, oh my God, how did I forget about that? Because that was a great book. And then there was a couple of books I read that were really tough reading. So there was Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story by Julie K. Brown, which is very hard reading.
I'd say so.
It was one I wanted to read in 2022. Basically, she kind of got caught up in the story and reporting elements of the story, but as we kind of know now, an awful lot of what he was accused of and was getting up to was being tampered down, was being kind of hidden. People with influence were trying to stop other people kind of looking into him, and eventually kind of the story broke properly. And another one actually that ties in really well with that I had read a bit before it was, sorry, no, I'm just scrolling here, Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. So he is a journalist as well. He's Mia Farrow's son, and his one was about Harvey Weinstein and about how he kind of was catching up or catching bits and pieces about that story and about the abuse that was going on there. But again, was being kind of blocked at different corners from reporting on it. And the title Catch and Kill, apparently in kind of journalist parlance, means where you basically catch a story before it gets out and you kill it so that
you're the one that
people don't hear about it, and you're really? No, you're not the one that breaks it. You're the one that hides it. Yeah. So the idea being that the people that were kind of his bosses were being like, oh yeah, get all the information you can on that story, and we are not going to release that information, but we're going to have it so that no one else can.
Wow.
So that was another fascinating read. So the two of those are two in particular that I'm like, how did I forget about them? But when I think nonfiction, they're not two that just jump into my head either. So that kind of genre of writing where it's, I suppose, people reporting on someone else, is clearly,
Do you think that even just having this snippet of a conversation, we read essentially to escape and to discover new places, words, people, everything. Fiction in general provides a kind of a positive escapism. Do you know, you're transported to another place, you meet these new people. Do you think that non-fiction is harder hitting? Like, generally, like, someone's not going to write a non-fiction book unless there's something worth telling, and like, just based on what you just said there, they're very heavy topics. And even as I scrolled through my story graph earlier, like, a lot of the non-fiction books that I've read are hard hitting, and you know, they are the ones that you will kind of leave and go, genie, like, that was a lot, but you know, worth knowing. Maybe that could be a reason why it's not as read as fiction, potentially.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I agree with you, because like, when I was thinking about this earlier, that was one kind of conclusion I came to, because for the most part, people read for entertainment. And that's what we kind of associate reading with, you know, entertainment by and large.
And enjoyment,
non-fiction isn't necessarily there for entertainment. It's like, non-fiction is usually there to teach us something, or to tell us something, or to fill us in about a topic that we do not know enough about, which is really important. But as you just said, quite often they are topics that are difficult to actually take in. And they're ones that we might reach for, you know, every few books, or you might go, you know, after a few kind of light-hearted fiction books, you might go, okay, well, now I'm ready for this title and I'll read it now. But they quite often aren't books that you would just pick up to pass away the time on a car journey, or, you know, maybe out for your walk, kind of just to, you know, while you're daydreaming or whatever. They're ones that you have to feel in the headspace for. Generally.
I can see why. Like, when I'm scrolling here now, the things that are kind of standing out to me, and I'm just literally scrolling through. So I'm seeing Fat Chance by Louise McSharry, which talks about weight and people's opinions on other people's bodies, I suppose. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I Am Malala. Bessborough, that's an important one. Whispering Hope, which I've just read. Lily Allen's one, which talks about like her issues, mental health stuff. Niall Breslin's book, which is Mental Health, the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which just talks about a total abuse of power when it comes to the medical community. Like, none of these are easy reads, you know. Like, I know that some of them we've been encouraged to read when we were younger, such as like Anne Frank's diary, but they're not the same as sitting down and reading for the sake of enjoyment. As you said, you really need to be mentally able and prepared to read what you're about to. So Aoife recently mentioned, it's Aoife that I kind of associated it with, and I know a lot of people have read it since, and I downloaded it recently, is Rob Delaney's book, A Heart That Works. Yes. I want to read that. I'm not mentally or emotionally able to read it at present, but and I think a lot of people feel the same. So like, there's things like that you know are worth reading, but you have to be ready for it.
Like, these books all serve a very good purpose and a clear purpose, but it's just being in the headspace for what information that the information that you're going to be taking in. You know, are you ready for that or not?
Yes.
So that seems to be the big, it is, and I know it sounds quite obvious when we're saying it now, but I suppose until you actually talk about these things, like, that is the big difference between the non-fiction ones and fiction. Now, there are maybe other non-fiction, like, of course there are going to be non-fiction titles that are quite entertaining, but at the same time you're learning something about maybe that person. Like, one that comes to mind is Ross Matthews. I don't know, do you ever watch RuPaul's Drag Race?
No, I haven't actually.
No, he's a judge on that, and he's kind of a comedian. He's hilarious, absolutely hilarious, but his book is called Name Drop, but it is like the nicest book about other people in the sense that he has all these stories about celebrities that he's met and things he's gotten up to, with, in relation to like other famous people. But they're all like funny stories and nice stories and, these lovely encounters. Like there's nothing scandalous or mean or terrible in it. And it was quite entertaining I suppose, in the sense of, in comparison to other non-fiction titles that would be kind of, from a similar celebrity kind of person. But again, I suppose that's the kind of business he's in at the same time. His business is kind of as a comedian to entertain people. And I suppose it made sense then for him to write a title like that. I like that too, but that would be definitely in the minority, like by and large.
That's quite interesting because I'm just thinking of some of my more recent non-fiction reads, which would be by comedians as well. So Rob Beckett, A Class Act, while it is hilarious and I laughed my bum off in the car, I listened to it on audio. It deals with prejudices around class and where you fall in society, which was really interesting. And then their Parenting Hell book was very interesting as well, but it dealt with how hard it is to be a parent. So they all, now both of these were really, really funny, and Caroline put me in the road to read Parenting Hell, and I have to say it was just absolutely brilliant. Do you know when you just read a book and you're like, God, I can relate to this so much at times. It was just excellent. So like you would be laughing, but it was really interesting too, and very interesting to hear about parenting from a male perspective, because an awful lot of parenting stuff is generally directed at moms. Yeah, so those kind of things, like comedians, you're right, like they will try to entertain, and even Lauren Graham's book, I found that quite entertaining as well. I read two of Julie Andrews', I think they're autobiographies, Home and Homework. I love Julie Andrews. I love The Sound of Music, and I love, oh my God, Claire. What's her other one? Oh, Mary Poppins. God, I love Mary Poppins. So I was determined to read her book because I'd seen it loads and I was like, I really want to read it, and loved it. Learned so much about her. Like her name is not Julie Andrews.
Is it not?
And I know that most celebrities do change their name. But what happened was, and I'm going to mess up this story big time, I'd say, her mother had her, and her name was Julia something, can't think of the surname, and she married a man called something Andrews, and her mom said, Julia Andrews is hard to say, so we're going to just call you Julie. Oh, so they literally just changed her name out of convenience for the way that she pronounced it. So things like that, it's quite interesting to hear like how certain things came about, because I love the name Julie Andrews. I think it just sounds so classic and professional. So you would think it's a stage name, but so it's actually just a really weird combination of events that led to her having this beautiful name, I suppose.
That's a nice little tidbit there.
There's a random fact for you now. Yeah, if I could remember it all now, I'd be doing well.
The fact that nonfiction can be quite hard topic-wise to kind of take on and consume as a reader. Like, why else do you think that nonfiction isn't something we tend to gravitate towards? Or why is it that we don't reach for it?
I don't know. I mean, like when we're in school, we were always given works of fiction to read. When you're a child, obviously, I know stories when you're a child are generally fictional, but I wonder, does that influence our preferences even slightly? Do you know, like I don't ever remember reading a biography or a memoir or anything like that throughout my schooling. Even in college, everything was fictional that I can recall. I don't think there was anything that was a work of non-fiction.
Anne Frank that was probably it.
Well, yes, actually, sorry. Anne Frank, I actually never read that in school. I read that in college by myself, Do you know, so like it wasn't something that was ever put on a curriculum in front of me. Which is interesting as well too. Like you'd wonder, do people veer away from teaching it in a classroom or bringing it into a classroom, because the topics are so heavy hitting. And the fact that when you're reading something that is fictional, you can and if it's difficult as a topic, you can always go, well, that's not real.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's something that is real, and if you know it has happened, like the Holocaust, it can be quite difficult to read, because it like there's nothing to say that you couldn't be sitting there going, well, it's happened before, it could happen again, you know. And potentially these books are not brought into an educational setting because of that. And
obviously it's coming from a very privileged place where we can say that people are choosing not to talk about these issues, you know, that people have the privilege of not talking about it if they opt not to.
It's important that we do read these books, because like we can't bury our heads in the sand and ignore these heavy hitting topics. And these, like, I think for me, reading always comes back to the human experience and like what you can relate. So I very much read my books and feel them. I'm a very emotional person. I'm very empathetic, and that's when I love a book, is when I can genuinely feel what's going on in it and it makes an impact on me emotionally. So that's what I'm kind of saying. Like, we can't bury our heads in the sand. We need to recognise that there are injustices going on in the world in every different society for different reasons, and it's important that we recognise them. And reading is the best way in sometimes to explore these issues. So I just think it's interesting that, and I know I'm after rambling now, but perhaps it's because of school that we don't develop an appreciation for non-fiction as we grow. They can open doors as well, and they can encourage people to think a little bit differently about things that they might be experiencing, and they can have a very profound effect on people. So are we doing our youth a disservice by not encouraging them to read more works of non-fiction as they grow? I'm quite conscious of that now, kind of going, what books do we need to get for our kids now? That would be my long-winded answer.
Like, the thing is that for the fraction of non-fiction reads we have read, both of us have been quite positive about them. Like, there's very few non-fiction that, again, when I was looking through the list a while ago, that I looked at and went, oh God, I did not enjoy that. Like, there was one or two that I looked at and go, I wouldn't be recommending them to people, and I'm not going to say it now. I think it was more so a personal preference thing in relation to what was being spoken about. Like, there was nothing bad or, necessarily. They were books I could see other people quite enjoying. But just for me, they were ones I was like, no, I just didn't take enough from this for it to have been worth my while. To have read this book, I had a look, to see was there any kind of definitive list of the best non-fiction titles. Now, this article is from a few years ago, so there are obviously going to be some titles that probably would have made this list in the interim that aren't here at the moment. But this Robert McCrum for The Guardian wrote his personal best list of the top 100 non-fiction titles. So I'll go through the top few very quickly. And again, there might be some really, there might be some inspiration for people for titles that they might have heard before. There are some that I haven't heard before, but every single one of these sounds great. And I'm like, why am I not reading more of these books? Because they all sound super interesting. So his number one, and again, keep in mind, this is from a few years ago. The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. So this is an engrossing account of the looming catastrophe caused by ecology's neighbours from hell, i.e. mankind. Number 2, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Steely and devastating examination of the author's grief following the sudden death of her husband changed the nature of writing about bereavement. Number 3 is one I have on my to-read list, actually. It's No Logo by Naomi Klein.
Haven't heard of that.
Naomi Klein's timely anti-branding Bible combined a fresh approach to corporate hegemony with potent reportage from the dark side of capitalism. Basically, like the influence that brands and brand culture has on society.
Okay.
Yeah. Number 4, Birthday Letters by Ted Hughes. So these passionate, audacious poems addressed to Hughes' late wife, Sylvia Plath, contribute to the couple's mythology and are a landmark in English poetry. Number 5, Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. This remarkably candid memoir revealed not only a literary talent, but a force that would change the face of US politics forever. This list definitely came out before Obama's newer memoir. So I assume that would be pretty high up in the list.
Yes,
Yeah.
I haven't read that. I've read Michelle Obama's book and loved it. I tried Barack's book and struggled a bit.
It was really good. I listened to it, and it was one of those ones that I dipped in and out of. I found it really interesting, but very, very politically heavy. Very politics heavy, which is obviously quite natural, but...
And I think I will go back to it.
I could listen to him talking all day, to be fair. So, number 6 then, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. So the theoretical physicist's mega-selling account of the origins of the universe is a masterpiece of scientific inquiry that has influenced the minds of a generation. I've never read it. I feel like I should have.
I haven't read any of these.
I haven't either yet, but like,
I'm sitting here going, are you actually a reader at all, Claire? Like, you've read none of these.
Yeah. The number 7 then, The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. Now, like, some of these are from, like, the next 3 are from the 70s. So, you know, there's some of these that we're not going to have heard of. But Tom Wolfe raised reportage to dazzling new levels in his quest to discover what makes a man fly to the moon. Number 8, which I'm pretty sure I came across in college, Orientalism by Edward Said. This polemical masterpiece challenging Western attitudes to the East is as topical today as it was on publication. Number 9, Dispatches by Michael Herr. A compelling sense of urgency and a unique voice make Herr's Vietnam memoir the definitive account of war in our time.
Wow.
Number 10, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. An intoxicating renewal of evolutionary theory that coined the idea of the meme and paved the way for Professor Dawkins' later more polemical works. And I'm going to stop then at number 11. Is North by Seamus Heaney. So his 1975 collection. This raw, tender, unguarded collection transcends politics, reflecting Heaney's desire to move like a double agent among the big concepts.
So that's 2 poetry collections.
Yeah. And like, even scrolling on here now, there is like Sylvia Plath, that was number 17. There are some about like the origins of rock and roll. There is feminist theory. There are loads here that I'm already going, I really wish, I would really like to read these, like, but, you know, the TBR is already quite long, but like, they all sound excellent. And I'm like, I'm not even aware of most of them, not to mind having read them.
That's it. Like, there's so many books that are written that we don't hear enough about. And I think we do get sucked into the vacuum of being on Bookstagram and seeing all these specific books being recommended. And, you know, there tends to be a bit of a culture of, like, I want to read what everyone else is reading. And you've got your buddy reads and all that. I'm actually reading Mary Cassidy's book at the end of this month. So that's non-fiction. Yes. But I think that one is going to be really, really interesting. Are there any books, non-fiction books that you've read that you think are really important that you would encourage other people to pick up?
Yeah, like there was, again, looking through my list a while ago, like one of the ones that I came across was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Eddo-Lodge. And that is a brilliant book because it, like the standpoint of the book is that she should not have to be constantly explaining herself or trying to educate white people about what is wrong with society, about why Black people and other people of colour are treated so badly, that it is basically, the onus is actually on us as white people to educate ourselves. Now, obviously, this is very much paraphrasing it, but that, you know, people of colour have enough of a burden on them with all of the different societal structures that they are, you know, that they're maybe facing, that are causing negativity in their lives. They have so much going on already that they don't also need to be taking on the burden of teaching us to be better people, basically. So that was an excellent book. And Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabray, who is an Irish writer, is another excellent look at that, you know, and she kind of does it through the lens. I'm sure Sinead Cudahy on her interview mentioned it as well. She does it through the lens of the fact that, you know, even something like hair can differentiate people, but like the negativity and like how even her hair makes her, you know, people treat her as other because her hair is so different, not to mind everything else. Like that's another excellent title. But one I think, one I thought was fascinating, on a kind of a totally different end of the scale, was I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. Have you read that one? No.
What's it about?
No. So if you're interested in true crime at all, so Michelle McNamara, if you know the actor Patton Oswalt, she was his wife. She got very interested in true crime. I think she was always quite interested in true crime, and you know, as we've seen, there's been like an explosion in kind of true crime investigation online in the last number of years, the last decade or so. But she became very involved in kind of online true crime forums and so on, and spent a significant portion of her adult life looking into certain cases and trying to kind of investigate as kind of an ordinary person cases like that were still unsolved. And there was one particular case that she became very interested in. I'm not going to go into what it is now, but she felt she was getting very close to finding out some really important information, was writing this book, and actually passed away. Oh
my God.
Shortly afterwards. And shortly after the book came out.
After she found the information?
Well, yeah, basically. After she kind of, her investigating helped to kind of point it in the right direction. And shortly after she passed away, the person was found. A case that had been unsolved for many decades. And she, you know, her...
And is that based on the information that she found?
To a degree, yeah. To a degree. She was kind of, her and others, like obviously we're kind of looking into it, but definitely her work and her kind of pushing to keep investigating and kind of a fresh outlook on how it could be investigated as a cold case now definitely helped to push it in the right direction. It was just a fascinating read, but like such a bittersweet read to know, because I actually read the book and then went on this whole binge of reading more about the case, the particular case. It's actually cases that she was looking at, and listening to podcasts about it. And next thing these reports started coming out that they thought they had found him, and he was arrested. So that's well worth a read. Okay, so if you were to pick, Claire, like, so they were like a few of ones I feel were very interesting / important reads. What would you put in there?
Okay, I have gone with The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks as one. And I know that we discussed this briefly in our interview with Sinead Cudahy, but if you haven't heard about it already, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is about this Black woman, Henrietta Lacks, who died of an aggressive form of cervical cancer, and basically her cells were taken from her in hospital without her consent, and they were used in labs, and they were used basically to develop pretty much every vaccine that we have from then on. Like, she died in 1951, so like for cancer trials and stuff like that. Yeah. So she I'm just going to take a brief look here at a kind of a summary. So this tells the story of her legacy, the HeLa cell line taken from Henrietta's tumour while she was still alive, cultured in a lab and discovered to be immortal. So these cells can't be killed, I think. After her death, HeLa was mass-produced and sold to laboratories all over the world. It has been used in a vast and varied array of scientific research, including research into cancer, the human genome, and the development of the polio vaccine. And it continues to be used to this day. What was the interesting thing about this is that there was absolutely no consent given for them to take and use her cells, especially like the whole mass production and sale of the cells. And she came from a poor black family, and her family didn't see a penny of it. You know, they actually didn't learn about this until years after her death. And like, it must be quite upsetting to hear that your mother's cells had been taken. You know, it kind of brings me back to our discussion around Take My Hand. Just the fact that people thought that it was within their rights to take things from people that needed more help than anything, and their trust was abused. Absolutely. It's kind of shocking that they didn't, like, we would find it shocking that they didn't communicate. I suppose learning more about it after reading Take My Hand especially, it should come as no surprise that things weren't being communicated with the families and what their medical intents were. But it's so interesting to just read this book and see, like, just the fact that their mother has been pivotal in the development of so many medical discoveries, and they knew nothing about it, and people are profiting off of all of this. It's actually disgusting to know that this happened, and I think that it's important for us to read. And do you know what's actually quite interesting, and I'm just going to interrupt myself here, but so the books that we're recommending are all to do with race and you know, learning about other cultures and how they've been mistreated and how they're judged and stuff like that, which I think shows an awful lot about our preferences and just non-fiction in general, that I look at it as a form of education as opposed to entertainment at times. And then the second book that I would recommend that people would look at is The Choice by Edith Eger. I think I'm pronouncing her surname wrong there. I'm not 100% sure. But she was a Holocaust survivor, and it is just, it's a difficult read, but it's also a beautiful book because she talks about the fact that no one can take away your choice to look at life in a certain way. Like, yes, things could be going terribly wrong all around you, but you have the choice to try and find the positives. You have the choice to not focus on, you know, whatever happened yesterday or whatever. And it's actually really enlightening. It's admirable that anyone, like, that you could have this positive outlook. It's up to you and how you choose to feel. And again, that comes back to the whole psychology thing for me. I really enjoy looking at the way that we think and how, you know, the way that our brains work around things like anxiety, depression and stuff. And yeah, I find it fascinating to look at things like that. And I think it's important that people read more about things like that because, you know, people do suffer from mental health issues, and we no longer, you know, brush them under a rug or anything. Yeah. We encourage people to talk about them. But I think, like you were saying about race, we have a duty to learn about these things in order to be able to have these conversations with our friends or family members.
Yeah.
So it is up to us to educate ourselves on these issues. And if we want to, personally, I feel like if we want to raise our children in a world that is more open and more accepting and more, kind, you would expect and hope that it is also a world that is more knowledgeable and more engaged in learning about issues as they arise and as we encounter them in our lives.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And nonfiction is a powerful way to do that, because especially when it comes from the voice of the person.
Yeah.
We're hearing from their point of view, we're hearing from their experience. It is not a fictionalized account of something like that. And that can be done quite well as well. I'm not saying that every fictionalized account of traumatic things or,
yeah, I know what you're
issues
saying.
like that is badly done. But yeah, that having someone's authentic voice telling the story and educating us and teaching us and informing us about these issues is invaluable. So it is.
And it's kind of like this, you're having a conversation. We are having a conversation about this. So we're exploring the topic a bit more, and I can relate to what you're saying and you can relate to me. And hopefully people that are listening are kind of nodding along or whatever and going, oh yeah, I agree with that, or shaking your head and saying absolutely not. But I think when you're reading something that's nonfiction, it's nearly more of a conversation than a story. And yes. Like when we have conversations ourselves outside of this recording studio, we tend to relay familiar experiences back and forth to show one another that we understand what another person is feeling, or we've been in a similar situation. And so I think that's the power of certain nonfiction books as well, is that you can read it and go, this is an actual human being who has had this kind of an experience, and there's a certain level of empathy that can be there in a nonfiction experience that's not always necessarily there in a fictional.
Yes, I know what you mean.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, because your head is making it's differentiating between this is real and this is a lived experience, rather than this is a creative, view of the same issue or a similar issue. Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. I had a few facts there. If you'd like some statistics at this point in the episode.
I love numbers, you know that.
I was convinced. I saw an article in the last few days, like within the last week, saying that nonfiction sales were on the decline. That in the last decade, nonfiction in general, numbers sales-wise have gone down. Now, for the life of me, I cannot find that article when I went looking earlier. It may have been shared on an Instagram post or story, but I definitely remember reading it and going, God, I'm kind of surprised about that. And obviously Prince Harry's autobiography has totally bucked that trend. But I kind of was looking into it when I couldn't find the actual article, and I'm presuming I didn't totally imagine it. Here are some relevant figures. So it said, so just to start off, there is some welcome news for the book trade in Ireland, as figures reveal that more money was spent on books in 2022 than ever before, which I think we kind of knew about, which is obviously fantastic news. Yeah. 2022 marks the 8th year in a row of growth in Ireland, with the market improved by 3.8 million books since 2014. Both children's and fiction sectors set new lifetime highs for value sales, while non-fiction declined, though both measures remained ahead of every year from 2011 to 2019.
Particularly when we think about the fact that when people ask us to, like, what would you recommend around even audiobooks, that generally we say go with the biography or something like that first, if you're not used to listening to fiction from that kind of an oral experience. But
yes, and even funnily enough, like, we put up a story there was last week or a couple of weeks ago asking what people's go-to genres were, fiction or non-fiction, was not, of the people who answered, of course, was not the go-to genre for anyone. But then we also asked what genre would people like to read more of in future, and multiple people said non-fiction.
That's interesting.
So it's obviously something people are aware of, yeah. Just following on from those figures then as well, actually, just while I have the document in front of me, the US figures kind of reflect this in terms of non-fiction. It says that print sales of ads, so this is in the American market now last year, or in the last couple of years. Print sales of adult fiction were up 8.5%, which was credited to the power of book talk. No mention of Bookstagram, unfortunately. US Trade Publishing's largest category, adult nonfiction, saw a 10.3% drop in sales in 2022 compared to 2021. So that seems to be a trend in America and in Ireland for the last year. Now, it does say, interestingly, going back to actually what we were just saying, that in 2020, audiobooks were most popular within the adult non-fiction category, I'd say, in terms of how people were consuming their non-fiction.
Yeah, it was probably more
the audiobook
convenient.
format represented 1 in 5 books sold for this segment, which definitely makes sense.
We put up a poll at the start of recording this episode, because we had a bit of a mini debate before we came on just about whether poetry is non-fiction or a separate genre. And the majority of the votes, there was one person voted for non-fiction and everybody else voted for a separate genre.
Okay.
That's interesting, because I would have categorized it as a separate genre. Yeah,
I would have too. It's just when I kept coming across it then as something within the non-fiction sector, I was like, oh, this is interesting.
I love poetry. Like, I have books upon books of poetry here, and I dabbled in writing, and like, yeah, I think it's very enjoyable, and there's a deep sense of connection when you're reading poetry that you might not necessarily find in a biography or a memoir if you feel very far removed from the author or the experiences that are being depicted. I think you can always find something to connect to in poetry. But in saying that, poetry is a genre, or there we go, is it a genre that a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy? Yeah. From my experience of talking to people. I mean, I do love it, and I love teaching it.
And I think a lot of that comes back to schooling, though. I think it comes back to people's experience of it and being made learn it, and especially like previous generations, like kind of the rote learning of poems, as opposed to like the discussion of poems, which is what it should be, you know?
Yes. And I think the way that it's taught in general, like if you've got a teacher standing in front of you that is passionate about something, that can ignite a little fire in you about what they're speaking about. So that like primary, secondary, third level, whatever. And I was very lucky to have some brilliant English teachers in my time, and one in particular comes to mind, and he was outstanding, and he just the way he described what was going on in the poem was like, you'd be absolutely enthralled. He was a great storyteller himself, so he made it come alive, you know. So I think that that's important as well, just the way that you are introduced to it too.
So yeah, that would be a really interesting thing to actually ask people who are listening and following, you know, what is their opinion on why we do or don't read enough or more nonfiction? What do they consider nonfiction, or like kind of what jumps into their head straight away? Are they surprised or otherwise by the amount of nonfiction they do or don't read? It would be very interesting to see the figures on that from our followers. So I think at this point, Claire, we're probably getting into the final segment, which is our recommendation segment, and we've already recommended, or I suppose referred to, lots of books at this point, but is there any one book that maybe you haven't mentioned before now that falls into the nonfiction category that you think is worth recommending to people listening?
Yeah, I think I would go with The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I think that there's an awful lot to learn from that. I also, and I don't know if this is a book that is enjoyed by everybody or not, or if people have whatever opinions on it, but Wild by Cheryl Strayed, that book hit me deeply when I read it. Have you read it?
No, I don't think I know it at all.
Oh, really? Reese Witherspoon made it into a movie.
Something is ringing a bell, but...
Yeah, so at 22, Cheryl Strayed thought she had lost everything in the wake of her mother's death. Her family scattered and her own marriage was soon destroyed. 4 years later, with nothing more to lose, she made the most impulsive decision of her life. With no experience or training, driven only by blind will, she would hike more than 1,000 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail from the Mojave Desert through California and Oregon to Washington State, and she would do it alone. Yeah. Told with suspense and style, sparkling with warmth and humour, Wild powerfully captures the terrors and pleasures of one young woman forging ahead against all odds on a journey that maddened, strengthened and ultimately healed her. I enjoyed it. I found it quite inspiring, and I have not heard of that, and that sounds really interesting and kind of empowering, like you were saying earlier. Yes, well. It is. And I think if you're reading a book at a time when you kind of need a little bit of a nudge of, come on, you can do this, or, like you're not alone in feeling a certain way, these books are fantastic. So I really, really loved that book, and I watched the movie, and I think that the movie as well was quite good. And it's actually a book that I kind of go back and go, I want to reread that at some stage. So maybe that one.
Yeah.
I know it might not be for everybody, because as I said, sometimes you have to be in the right place for these books. So either the Henrietta Lacks book or Wild by Cheryl Strayed. What about you? What one would you pick?
I haven't mentioned it before, for this episode, and I don't think I've mentioned it previously in other episodes. I'm not 100% sure, but Richie Sadlier's memoir, Recovering, is excellent. I came across it randomly on BorrowBox at some point last year. I needed an audiobook. He narrates it himself, and I just decided to listen to it. I knew very little about it. I knew very little about him, and it was just fascinating. I'm not big into sports by any means. Definitely wouldn't be just big into soccer, just kind of for no reason. But it was so interesting. So just the blurb for maybe anyone else that isn't overly familiar with him. So when a career-ending injury saw former Ireland and Millwall striker Richie Sadlier retired from football at age 24, his life spiralled out of control. Without structure or a sense of purpose and fueled by a dependency on alcohol, he spent years running from the dark memories and feelings that had haunted him since childhood. Until one day he hit rock bottom and decided to confront his demons. It is brilliant. And the big thing with him in particular is that he has become such an advocate for educating our young people in this country in terms of mental health, sex, relationships, addiction. He actually has set up a sexual health awareness program for people in kind of senior cycle secondary school around the ideas of sexual health, relationships, consent. It's brilliant. And from listening to his autobiography, you can totally see where it's coming from, that his own perceptions of what was okay and what was acceptable within relationships was really negative and was really distorted at one point in his life. And kind of when he realised that, okay, well, I now know it after many, many struggles in my life and after going through a lot of really bad stuff. I want to educate people when they're at an appropriate age, when they are younger, about these same issues so that they don't make the same mistakes, they don't go through the same problems. That book is excellent, and what he's doing for young people in this country at the moment is also excellent. So that would be my recommendation.
I wonder, would he have gotten as much of a hearing from a publishing agency had he not been who he is. Do you know, like, does your status in the celebrity world or sporting world grant you like this extra key or extra ticket to get into publishing and writing and stuff like that? So now it probably
because there was that hook for people, like,
which is great because this is, you know, it's a very important topic. Yeah,
that's exactly it. Like, in terms of how he got, I suppose, the book out there and so on, like, definitely his celebrity would have helped, but also the fact that he is well known within, like, he's on TV now, like, you know, as a pundit and so on, and to have him as someone that young people can look up to is great. So yeah, I would recommend that, and you do not even remotely have to be interested in sports or anything to enjoy it. So that is my recommendation.
That sounds good. I'll have to actually pick that one up. To be fair, I think a lot of the books that we've discussed on here, even the ones that I'd never heard of before, they sound quite interesting. Like, I do want to go and look at these and see what I think of them. It's important too that you read a book when you're ready for it. You know, like, I've picked up, and I said it in one of the previous episodes or chapters, that I was gifted a book and I couldn't bring myself to actually read it. I wasn't ready for it, and I still haven't gone back to it, but I will, you know. And I think the key here is that you're saying, like, you will go back to it. You're not just dismissing it as too hard a topic or something that you want to be in willful ignorance about, which is far too easy for a lot of us to do in privileged positions. But that even the stuff that is very hard to read, that even if we have to put it down and come back to it, we are willing to keep reading and willing to educate ourselves and experience these issues or learn about these things when we can. Very good. So, Sinead, I think that's the end of this one. I actually really enjoyed. I was kind of a little bit wary of having a discussion around nonfiction because I felt like I wasn't, like, qualified enough to have that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, in fairness, you know, I would say this isn't prefacing it because we've already had the discussion, but definitely, like, this discussion is coming from, you know, clearly it's coming from the point of view of two people who admittedly feel we don't read enough nonfiction, but at the same time understand the importance of it and feel it's something both of us would like to rectify. I definitely feel like I need to pick up more nonfiction.
I think this links in very nicely to the whole point of why we started this to begin with, is to be having these conversations about books and why they're important. You know, so we might be more, you and I might be more conscious going forward of picking up one nonfiction book a month, you know, or trying to broaden our horizons in that sense. And it all comes down to the conversations that are stemmed from reading, which is wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Another Chapter podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share to keep the book conversation going. Thank you to Helen Becerra for the graphics, Mark Neville for the mixing, and to each of our contributors. Music is Make It Work by All Good Folks.
Don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Another Chapter Podcast. We'll see you there.